So, as Micah said, she could probably stand up here all evening and give you examples of lives that have been changed, of attitudes that have been changed throughout the work that is going on in the educational arm of the pro-life movement. The culture is definitely shifting in our country. Canadians are beginning to understand that abortion does represent an egregious human rights violation. The one-on-one conversations Micah was talking about are having tremendous impact, and we can be very, very thankful and appreciative of the work that is going on in the educational arm of the pro-life movement. Now, while the efforts of We Need a Law, the organization that I direct, are also educational, our work is primarily conducted in what we call the political arm of the pro-life movement. And in the political arm, we have not seen nearly as many successes as in the educational. In fact, it has been almost 30 years since we have experienced a political victory for our preborn neighbors. Ever since that fateful day in 1988, when the Supreme Court struck our abortion regulations down, there have been zero advances made in the political realm. Today, we are one of only 3 countries in the entire world: Canada, North Korea, and China. The only 3 countries with no legal protection for children in the womb. This is terrible company, I'm sure you will understand. China and North Korea are not, generally speaking, nations that we look to and applaud for their upholding of human rights. Now, politics, speaking here now of the political arm of the pro-life movement, politics, by its very nature, involves only doing what is possible. While all of us would love to see a perfect law, that rarely, if ever, has been achieved in any area of law in our country. In Canada's political climate, options for abortion regulations are limited, and good judgment is required, in which certain obstacles need to be considered before we continue to proceed. As we all know, abortion is legal in Canada throughout all months of pregnancy. And I refer to this as a pathetic status quo. And I'm convinced through our work that this pathetic status quo can be improved upon. Progress can be made, but only when the ideal is not achievable and we can pursue something that moves us closer to it, will we continue to make progress. Now, I want to be very clear here. The pursuit of a law that protects our preborn neighbors, that protects only some of them, does not mean that pro-lifers do not want to protect all preborn children. It simply means that at the current time we cannot. And that could be due to obstacles that are well beyond our control. It could be social obstacles, legal, cultural, political obstacles that we have no control over. There are opportunities that exist right now for the political arm of the pro-life movement to seize on in order to advance preborn human rights in Canada today. And tonight, I want to look with you at 3 possible laws that are realistically achievable and are steps in the right direction. Laws that would restrict the evil of abortion. First, we're going to look at a late-term abortion law. So this is a law that will prohibit abortion after a certain stage of pregnancy. Next, we will look at a law that would make sex-selective abortion illegal, and thus address this reality of gendercide that we heard Micah discuss in her presentation. And lastly, we will talk to you about how you need to get involved in a more recent push for a preborn victims of crime law. It should be noted that the first 2, late-term abortion and sex-selective law, these restrict abortion directly. Preborn victims of crime law actually has nothing to do with abortion, but it would protect the lives of babies that women have chosen to carry to term. First, then, a late-term law. How would a late-term abortion law move us away from the status quo and save the lives of preborn children? Well, you see here on the screen a graph. This graph shows the various stages of development of a human being before he or she is born. Currently in Canada, none of these children have protection. A late-term abortion law, say at 20 weeks, would now protect this many children. This many children would now be protected. And the legal status of those not covered by the law would remain unchanged, would be the same as it is today. If another late-term abortion law was enacted, say at 13 weeks, then that many more children would be protected under the law. And again, the law prior to 13 weeks would remain unchanged. I think you will understand with me that life is a continuum. We've heard that theme throughout this evening, that our lives start at fertilization or conception. As Andre taught us earlier, our lives continue right through until our natural death. And currently in Canada, the reason I'm showing you this is because we already have an arbitrary law. We have a law in which only certain people are protected, people who have been born. So you might be thinking to yourself, is not a late-term law a compromise? Would this not be compromising our position as pro-lifers? I would submit to you that it's not. It's not a compromise. And that is because the definition of a compromise is that it is a settlement by mutual concessions. A compromise is when we concede something that we already have or control. We currently have unlimited abortion in Canada. A law that would prohibit abortions after a certain gestational age concedes nothing because we have nothing to concede. So in other words, it's all take, as pro-lifers, it's all take and all give from the other side. A late-term abortion law would take back ground that is already lost. It would push that arbitrary line. It would push that arbitrary line further this way, whereby more human beings would be protected than are protected right now. And therefore it would be a step in the right direction. Not only would it save the lives of preborn children, it is also very realistic because, as we see here, a majority of Canadians support laws that would regulate or restrict abortion into the earlier trimesters. This is from a 2011 Forum Research poll. We can see that in the second trimester, 58% of Canadians support laws protecting the child. When that moves to the third trimester, 77% support for laws that ban abortion in the third trimester. Clearly today, our laws are not in line with public opinion. So banning late-term abortion is an achievable goal, one that is very realistic to be passed in our country. The next example I want to give you is of a law that would take us in that right direction, concerns the issue of sex-selective abortion. We're hearing more and more about this in our day and age. As Micah already talked about, increasingly in Canada, abortion is being used when the gender of the child is not preferred. Most of the time, it is when the child is a girl. Preborn girls are being targeted simply because they are females. This is a gross human rights violation, and we need to do something about it. Gendercide is an interesting issue because it's one in which we as pro-lifers can collaborate with many different groups, some of which we might be diametrically opposed to when it comes to other life and moral issues. But when it comes to this topic of killing females just because of their gender, we can link arms and work together to push for legislative solutions that would end this atrocity in our country. In 2012, We Need a Law had opportunity to work with MP Mark Warwa. He's a member of Parliament from Langley, British Columbia. Some of you may recall that he introduced a motion that would see the House of Commons condemn sex-selective abortion. Now, unfortunately, his motion was blocked from ever coming to a vote in the House of Commons, but this does not mean that progress was not made. During debate on Mr. Warwa's motion, Canadians were educated as to the reality that our country is not immune from sex-selective abortion, and the media were openly siding with pro-lifers when his motion was denied a vote in the House of Commons. Over 500 mainstream newspaper articles covered his motions, and members of all political parties and the media lamented the perceived muzzling of Mr. Warwa by his own leader. Here's one example. Margaret Wenty of the Globe and Mail, she wrote, and I quote, "Everyone from the NDP to the National Post is cheering on the brave dissenters who defied the great dictator." Motion 408 also allowed Canadians to see just how extreme the pro-abortion lobby is in our country. I mean, you would think that all feminists would come to the defense of their preborn sisters. But no, out of fear that any protection for children in the womb would somehow trample their fabricated rights, they came out not in favor of Mr. Warwa's motion, and they condemned it as well. So this allowed us to see just how extreme the pro-abortion lobby is in Canada. The reality is, again, as it is with late-term abortion, the law is completely out of step with Canadians. Polls like this one, a 2011 Environics poll, showed that 92% of Canadians supported laws that would make sex-selective abortion illegal. Clearly, Canadians are repulsed that this is happening in our country. We need to continue making progress in this area, continue pushing for legislative change. So those are two laws, but that's not all. You'll recall that I also mentioned a law that would protect preborn victims of crime. This is another opportunity to recognize the lives of preborn children through laws that are currently non-existent in our country. In the book Complications, put out by the De Weber Institute in Toronto, considerable attention is given by the authors to this issue of intimate partner violence against pregnant women. The Preborn Victims of Crime law addresses this issue and would protect the lives of preborn children whose mothers had chosen to carry them to term. Canada needs to send a message that in any attack on a pregnant woman, the preborn child is also a victim. And a Preborn Victims of Crime law would send that message to Canadians. When Cassandra Cape was murdered, her daughter was not recognized as a human being under our Canadian criminal law, simply because she had not yet exited her mother's womb. Because of that legal deficiency, no murder charge will ever be laid. The reality is, Cassie and Molly's story is one of many, and it shouldn't be this way. We are very optimistic that such a law could be passed. And the reason why is because some years ago it almost did. In 2007, Ken Epp, an MP from Edmonton, Alberta, introduced an Unborn Victims of Crime Act. It had multi-party support, except, you might recall, that was during a time of successive minority governments. It had passed second reading in the House of Commons, and then an election was called. And when an election is called, all bills that are being discussed and debated are off the table and need to be resurrected right from the start again. And to this day, it has not yet. To give you an indication of how we can advance preborn human rights, during that time that Mr. Epp's bill was being debated, Joyce Arthur told the National Post. Joyce Arthur, for those of you who aren't aware, is the head of the Abortion Rights Coalition of Canada. National Abortion Advocacy Group. She told the National Post, and I quote, "If the fetuses are recognized in this bill, it could bleed into people's consciousness and make people change their minds about abortion." This will be a very effective bill to begin advancing preborn human rights. So, 3 laws, all of them, late-term, sex-selective, and preborn victims of crime, are only steps in the right direction. Will any of these laws, or even all 3 of them together, stop all abortions? Certainly not. They are imperfect laws that would only save some. But we people, we need to embrace the opportunities we have to save some as we continue working towards saving all preborn lives. So, are we making progress? Are things happening? Are we advancing? Are we moving forward? Is it realistic? You might be thinking, is it really realistic to think that one of those laws will be passed in the next 3 to 8 years? To which we answer, absolutely. We are very certain that we can make progress. And we can make progress because so many Canadians, including many of you here this evening, have joined our efforts. You have responded to our calls to action, and because of that, the government, as well as the media, have been reporting on our activity. Here's one example. This is from Maclean's Magazine. Maclean's Magazine article that featured the We Need a Law campaign. If you can't read it, I'll read it to you. It says here that we are using the right words. It says here, by changing tactics, the pro-life movement is putting fetal rights back on the agenda. Here's another one. More and more we're seeing headlines like this. This is in the National Post. The idea that we can't debate abortion is unworthy of a democratic country. This is in a mainstream secular newspaper, not a Christian publication. And some of you may be sitting here thinking, you know what, okay, that's the National Post. They're obviously right-wing, they're conservative, they're going to publish this kind of stuff. Here's another one. This again is from Margaret Wente of the pro-choice left-wing Globe and Mail. She said, in response to Mr. Trudeau's edict that no pro-lifers could run for his party, the idea that governments shouldn't legislate abortion, as Mr. Trudeau asserts, is downright idiotic. Abortion is legislated nearly everywhere. Even civilized countries impose restrictions. This is from a left-wing publication. Things are changing in our country. 10 years ago, Mr. Trudeau would have made his edict, the Globe and Mail would have applauded that. In fact, they were one of the primary reasons why, in 1969, as Andre described earlier, Pierre Trudeau legalized abortion in our country. Things are changing. We are making progress because people are putting their words into action. You folks are getting off that proverbial curb and you are engaging your neighbors because we're starting to understand that if we ever want to change this culture, we need to engage this culture. I want to share with you one example of regular folks doing meaningful work, meaningful engagement. On October 2nd, 2014, we put together perhaps the largest pro-life display ever in Canadian history. We'll allow the video to speak for itself. So that, ladies and gentlemen, was simply some creative thinking by a bunch of people who decided to do something. They wanted to do something. And since then, this pro-life display, these flags have been used over 30 times in our country, showing communities exactly how large this tragedy is in our country. We're very thankful to all the people who have joined us and continue to join us in putting on these flag displays. You know, the wise King Solomon, he once said something that is very striking. He said in Proverbs 24, he said, "Rescue those being taken away to death. Hold back those who are stumbling to the slaughter. If you say, 'Behold, we did not know this,' does not he who weighs the heart perceive it? Does not he who keeps watch over your soul know it?" In a very similar fashion, William Wilberforce, the British parliamentarian and evangelical Christian who spent most of his life combating the slave trade, he once said, "You may choose to look the other way, but you can never say again that you did not know." Tonight, we have all seen what abortion does to the smallest members of the human family. This injustice is such that we cannot afford to look the other way and pretend that we have not seen it. So yes, we are very excited about the progress as a result of you and your fellow citizens recognizing abortion for what it is, an injustice, and then taking action to address it. Whether it was an email to your member of parliament, could have been a letter to the local newspaper, could have been just a conversation with your coworker, maybe a fellow student or your neighbor. Maybe you put one of these trendy decals on your vehicle. I saw some of you purchasing them here this evening. Maybe you participated with us in our lawn sign campaign. Maybe you actually put out those flags with us at one or more of those events. Could have even been a combination of all of these actions. Your efforts are making a difference. Politicians are taking notice. The media is sensing a shift in the culture, and Canadians are more and more standing up for what is just and what is right. As for the results of this upcoming election on October 19th, that is not up to us. What we are certain about is that no matter who becomes your member of parliament, no matter who becomes the Prime Minister of Canada, we all have an incredibly important task. For so long as children in the womb are legally allowed to be killed, we need to continue advocating on their behalf. Dr. Martin Luther King once said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." The tragedy of abortion affects everyone in Canada. When the inalienable right to life is left unprotected for some, it threatens all. Today and nearly every day, 300 children in Canada lose their lives to abortion. The road we are on, it's a long one. Some of us here this evening may not even see victories achieved. But my friends, let us not lose heart. You can make a difference. Your participation with us here this evening is a sign that you care, that you want to do something. And our team has been working hard to put together tools for you to use as we engage the culture together. By being plugged into We Need a Law, you will be receiving updates in the coming weeks and months ahead in which you can engage with your members of parliament. If you did not register as you came in here this evening, please take a moment to do so as you leave so that you can stay plugged in for our updates. For tonight, I want you to know, hey, how come nobody told me? Nobody told me that I didn't advance the slide. Andre. Oh. For tonight, I want you to know that you can help us to ensure that the candidates asking for your votes are put on notice that preborn human rights matter. That you will be expecting them to move quickly in passing legislation that regulates abortion and brings us closer into line with every other country in our world. There are about 4 weeks left until Election Day. Tonight, we want to make sure that you have 3 specific tools as you go from here so that you can make a difference in this election. The first thing I want to draw your attention to is that card you received when you came in this evening. Did we receive that card? I don't think we received this card, did we? Nikki? Is Nikki there? Anyway, as you depart from here, you will certainly receive this card. This is a handy card which shows you where the political parties stand on the topic of preborn children. It goes through 4 separate issues and whether they support it or against it. On the back of that card, there are questions, suggested questions for you to ask your candidates. So when a candidate comes and knocks at your door, you can ask him or her, if elected, what will you do about gendercide in our country? If elected, will you stand up for preborn victims of crime, etc.? There are examples like that on the back of this card. Please take it with you as you leave here this evening. Whether it's a knock on the door, whether it's a phone call, whether you want to tweet at them, Many of the candidates are engaging with social media. You might want to engage them that way. Suggested questions for them. The second thing I want to draw your attention to is our window decals. You've seen them on the slide already. They're on the back table for a special life to a price of only $1. When you put one of these on your vehicle, people will ask you, what is this all about? Gives you an opportunity to get into the various things we just discussed earlier about late-term abortion, sex-selected abortion, and pre-born victims of crime. The last thing I want to draw your attention to is our lawn sign. Now, this is not the lawn sign that we're selling. But this lawn sign, I want to tell you a little story. I was in northern British Columbia last fall with a good pro-life friend of mine, John Hoff, and we were doing some presentations along Highway 16. And all through northern British Columbia, there are literally thousands of these signs. Do you all know what Enbridge is? Yeah. Enbridge, the oil pipeline, they want to build this pipeline across northern British Columbia to Prince Rupert so that they can put it on ships and ship it overseas. Well, there are literally thousands of people that are very opposed to Enbridge. And I draw your attention to it because they're not just opposed to it within the walls of community halls like this, or within the walls of their church, or even just within their homes. They want everybody to know where they stand on this issue. So we thought this is a good opportunity for us. We need signs as well. We need you folks to go home with one of these signs. A special life to a price of only $5. These signs are regular $18 when you purchase them off our website. Because we are able to buy a big bulk amount and fit them in that bus out there, only $5 while we're on Life Tour. Purchase a sign. Purchase 5 signs. Give them to your neighbors. Give them to the pro-life friends who might not be able to be here this evening. We want your neighbors to know that you're standing up for preborn human rights, and you want the laws of our land to change. The last thing I want to draw your attention to, it's not here on the screen, is that pack of postcards that you received when you came in. You should have received a pack of 5 postcards. In a few weeks after the election, when we know who your MP is, we will be sending you an email letting you know who your MP is and giving you suggestions as to what you can write on this postcard. Because we want Parliament Hill to be bombarded with postcards. Handwritten messages on postcards are far more effective than emails, and this one obviously has very colorful graphics associated with it. So please take those home with you and watch for an email in coming weeks from weneedalaw.ca. Now these are all small things, but when many people do small things, it makes a huge difference. In a few weeks, we will have a new government in our country, with many new faces in the House of Commons. And it will be their duty to pass laws for the benefit of all Canadians. And it is our duty to ensure that they cannot ignore and so violently discriminate against our fellow freeborn neighbors. We have an important task in telling the truth about the injustice of abortion, and we have, as Christians, an even more important task in standing up for those who cannot stand for themselves. The truth needs to get out, and I hope that you go from here with a renewed sense of excitement that you can participate in this struggle for justice. Remember, my friends, in order to change the culture, we need to engage the culture. And so I want to conclude with the words of Augustine, who once said, "Let us work as though everything depends on us, and pray as though everything depends on God." It is our prayer that you will work with us and embrace the opportunities we have to save some, as we continue working together to save everyone. Thank you very much.